Okay, so last time we met, we were working on moving some of the web services that we had been declaring and implementing on the client side. We moved them over to the server. Right? So this is the app.js, is the server side implementation of the for our server for our application, right? And this one is listening for an incoming request from a user, right, from the client. So the client is going to send a GET request with a username and password in the query string, and then we're going to use that to find the user in this array. Okay, right? Right now it's being used currently by the service, right, on the client side. This is the service on the client side that we rewrote the findUserById in the web service, right, to instead of looking for this username and password in the local array, right, we changed it to instead go fetch the data from the server. Okay, remember that? Right, so this request right here, API morning user, right, goes out to the server, which is listening for that incoming GET request. There it is, and then it's implemented in this event handler right here that parses the query for username and password, and then uses that to find the user that matches that criteria, and then it sends back the user as a JSON object back to the client. The client, meanwhile, receives this. First, is going to receive this response from the service, and eventually the controller, right, the controller who made the original call, right, in the login, right, here's the login, right, when we try to log in, right, it's going to make the call of findUserById to the local service that's going to make the HTTP request to the server. It's going to come back immediately with a promise. Right, remember, these two are services these are processes that are running on, completely two different processes, right? Presumably, they might be even running on two different machines, across the globe, right? One is a browser running on your machine, and the other one the server running, somewhere in Europe. Okay, so this call here is not a synchronous call; it's an asynchronous call, right? Meaning when the thread, this JavaScript thread, comes through here, and it makes this call, it's not going to wait. It's not going to block, right? Like you would normally expect, right? Functions typically in a sequential execution, the thread doesn't continue until this function comes back, right? But since this cannot wait for the server to come back because it might take milliseconds, seconds, minutes, hours, never, right? The server might be down, right? So the single thread that is running on the browser doesn't have the luxury of waiting, right? So instead, it asks the server, asks the browser, hey browser, you handle this, right? You have multiple threads, you know how to download all sorts of things at the same time, right? You handle this using AJAX, right? It's an asynchronous communication protocol, right? And then notify me later on, right? Notify me when it comes back. And the mechanism, the API to handle this asynchronous communication is that this HTTP call right here, this HTTP GET, right, returns an object. What it returns is not the response that comes from the server. Instead, it says, well, I'm gonna ask the browser to handle this, right? Meanwhile, I'm gonna return an object right away. I'm not gonna wait for the response to come back. Instead, I'm gonna return an object that is going to allow you to register for a callback, right? That at some point, I promise you that I'm going to call you back at some later time, whether it was successful or not. I'll let you know, but not just this minute because it's going to take a while, right? So here is so this object that comes back has a function called success that allows us to register a function, a callback function that eventually, right, when the response does come back, the browser will notify us and say, hey, remember that call that you made a couple of seconds ago? Well, hey, guess what? It came back from the server, right? And the server came back with this JSON object here. You want it? Right? And it passes it to us. It says, yeah, sure. It calls this function with the response that came back from the server, which we know it's a JSON object that represents the user, right? And So might as well call it user. Right? We know that that's what's coming back from the server. Right? That is exactly what we're sending back from the server. Right? Here it is. Right? That's what we're returning, the user object. Okay. And then we just continue with the normal logic that we had. Right? Just we navigate to the profile. Everybody okay? Yes.
So meanwhile, like let's say we introduce an artificial delay on the server.
Yes.
So that it delays it by 5 seconds.
Yeah.
So in the meanwhile, on the client side, can we introduce something which shows logging in or loading and plus the page or something?
Right. So what you could do is right before you make the request, right? You could say show, spinning, spinning glass or something, spinning hourglass, right? Which is going to show an image, maybe, okay, of something spinning right next to the login button or something, right? It's an animated GIF, right? An animated GIF. And then here, when it does come back, you can say hide, spinning weight. Okay, so in these two cases, it's just an image, right? And to give feedback to the user, we show it when we're waiting, right? And when we hide it when it doesn't show, right? You can and this would just be an animated GIF, and there's tons of them on the web, right? Animated animated GIF spinner. Yeah, there's tons of them. Right, so you can download, right, and just put it somewhere next to the image or next to an input field or next to whatever, and you hide it or show it, depending on if you're waiting, right? That makes sense? Okay. All right, so we did implement that. We went to the assignments. We went to the login, right? And it's not working. Wait, what? Did we run this? Is this running? Maybe it's not running. Okay. There it is. Okay. So presumably we can now log in using the server side. Let's look at the chatter between the client and the server and the network connection. So we say Bob and Bob. Notice that it did not go. Wait, what? Console, a spinner. Oh, okay. None of those functions actually exist. Let me remove these. Let's say Bob and Bob. And it went out. API morning users not found. Let's see why it's not. Did I remove it from the server? Let's go to the server. Oh yeah, okay. I commented it out for testing. There it is. It's this one right here. I'm gonna uncomment it. Okay, let me restart. There we go. So it went out, and it came back with the object and the correct object, and our controller. If it comes back successfully, it navigates to the profile with the login user ID. Yes, right now this profile, when it goes to that location, the profile controller. Notice what it's doing, right? It's still retrieving the user. Let's see, it's still retrieving the user from where? From findUserById, correct? So it's still using what? It's still using this guy, right? It's still using findUserById, this function right here, right? This function right here, findUserById, which iterates over the local array, right? So we need to fix this one as well, correct? Right? So we need to go out to the user to fetch that, right? So let's go fetch the user. So instead of this code, what we want to do is instead go out to the server, right? We're going to say return HTTP. I'm going to get, right? I'm going to go out to API / morning user, and we're going to pass the ID of the user, right? The user ID. Okay. If we refresh, notice that it went out to the server, but the server says, I don't know that URL. There's nothing mapped to that URL pattern. Okay. So we need to go to the server and create that URL pattern, right? So let's go out to the server, in the where is it? It's where? Let's see. It's right here, right? So let's create that URL pattern that listens for an incoming user ID. Right? We're going to find the user not by credential, but some other criteria found by user ID. Right? And we're going to implement that. Find by user ID. Again, request response, and it's going to retrieve. It's going to retrieve the user ID not from a query, right? The user ID is not in the as a query parameter, right? We're passing it how? We're passing it as part of the path. See that? Right. So this is not a query parameter; is a path parameter. Okay. So it's not available in the dot query. It's available in a different map, right? The map is the params map. So var user ID, we can retrieve from the request in the params. Right? Params is another map, right, that has all the path parameters. Right? So later on, right, if you pass later on, it asks you to map, user ID and website ID and page ID and widget ID. All those path parameters, right, will be part, right, of the path, and you will be retrieving them using the dot params. All right. Okay. So let's get user ID there. Now that we have user ID, we can move the logic that we had here. We can just move it here, copy and paste it, right, uncomment it. We're going to iterate over all the users, and if we find it, then we're going to, we don't have Angular on this side, right? We don't have client side, and there's no need to copy on this side, right? Because, again, these two exist on two completely different processes, right? It is a copy, right? There's no way for me to have a reference on something that lives in some other machine, right? So there's no need to copy. So we're going to, if we find the user, we're going to send back the user in the response. We're going to say send back the actual user or return null. Okay, so or and return, meaning we want to get out of this function, right? Otherwise, it would be an error, and then we just send back response. We can send back a status, right? If we didn't find it, if we didn't find the user, it would be appropriate to send a 404. We didn't find that user. Just like there's a missing HTML file or a missing image or a missing, the server would respond with a 404, right? So same thing here. If we're looking for anything that the server cannot find, it is appropriate to send a 404 error. Okay, and then we can send back maybe an empty object, right? Okay. On the clients, okay, so let's see this. Let's restart the server. Let's see what if this works now. If we refresh, there's an internal server. Let's see what happened. UID is not defined. UID. Okay, so I misspelled it. So it's user ID here, right? User ID. Let me restart. So if I refresh, okay, it looks like in the network, right? Indeed, we went out. Right, there's the request that went out to the server. It came back as 200, so it's okay, right? So the server found something, and this is what it came back. So in this page, we parsed the 234, we sent it over, and it's coming back with the correct object, right? Which we need to use to populate. Notice that it's not populating it. See that? Right? Because now, right, we're not using the local array, right? Instead, from the server, we're getting back a response. We need to use that object that came back from the server to populate the profile page, right? So let's do that. So the controller is still thinking that it's getting data from the local array. We'll need to fix that, right? So here's a profile controller. The profile controller. This actually should be done where? In a init function, right? We've been being a little lazy here. Let's move this code where it's supposed to go, right? This is supposed to be in an init function. So let's put this in an init function, right? And call the init. So let's put that there. So that should have been there already. So let's fix this. This is not returning. This now is an asynchronous call, right? It's not a synchronous call. It's an asynchronous call. So this is returning not the user is returning a promise. Yes, returning a promise that we need to register for a callback. Okay. So let's do that. Instead, this is not returning a user object. Instead, it's returning a promise. So this function returns that object, that promise object. We could assign it to a local promise, like we did in the login controller, yes? Or we could use this syntax, which is very common in JavaScript, that you change these things together. So here's the success, right? The success function is being called on the object that this function is returning. You see that? And the callback, we might call the function that renders this user on the view. Yes. So it's something like render user, right? A function that's an appropriate name for a function that handles that user and renders it on the view. So let's implement that function. Render receives as object a user, this is the response that comes from the server, right? And what does it do to render it? It just does this, right? This is the code for rendering. All right, let's move this here. All right, so if we refresh, notice that now it is rendering. See that? It says Bob, Marley, right? But now this data is coming from the server, right? It's no longer coming from the client. Okay. All right, so let's keep moving. So we did we now implemented findUserById, right? Let's now implement, for instance, update. Being able to update an existing user. All right, and we'll do that in the next video.